now it's time for you to ask questions. I would like to ask Ida and Rune to come up here. And then while they're walking up here, Sophie, I just want to ask you the first questions. Because you're the student here, what is your key takeaway from here? And please join on the stage as well.
Can everybody? Yeah, okay, I'm on. I've just been thinking about the whole ugliness thing. How, like the ruins and how the not beautiful is having a very big impact on what is actually aesthetic. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and actually also leads to the first question. For me, coming from outside, I don't have a background at this school or in beauty for that sake as well. And especially your two presentations, but also a little bit Kristine's, you're all some way deconstructing beauty, either by looking at decay, and I thought you said that, well, this is not conventional beauty. So my question is, do you have to deconstruct beauty if you have to make it sustainable?
Wow, that's a really good question. Big question. I've been thinking about, it's been a long time, as a curator, it's been a really long time since I've actually thought about the links between beauty and aesthetics. So it's really interesting to sort of situate that. So what was the question again? Do we have to deconstruct beauty? Well, I think I'll answer that question from a slightly different point of view. I think we absolutely need to rethink what it is that our aesthetic disciplines are doing, especially within this conversation. I think that, well, at least what I see that's happening right now, and what I find really exciting, is that there are a lot of people that are coming together to really sort of try and cultivate interdisciplinary conversations. And I cannot stress enough how interesting I think that that is, and it seems like this is also really where the interesting things are happening, right? So when designers and artists are talking to philosophers, to biologists.
You can just speak.
Okay.
I think it's just
which is never easy, because a lot of the time we do have very different kinds of takes on these questions, and we speak different kinds of languages. But it seems to me that at the sort of one of the fundamental problems that we're facing is that our sciences and our knowledge productions, and there have been we have been so focused in our singular sort of disciplines, and that we need to share knowledge, and we need to also challenge our own ways of doing knowledge and doing aesthetics. And I think that at least what I'm witnessing right now is that there's an urge for people to leave their singular disciplines behind and enter into these kinds of larger conversations. And of course, that also means questioning, well, what is beauty? Why are we designing? For whom are we designing? Do we even need to design more things? Do we need to make more things, and how? And opening these spaces, these experimental spaces for conversation, I think is urgent and interesting and really difficult. Mm-hmm. That was not replying your question.
No, but I think
at
it
all.
was a good point. Probably not a reply, but more point. But it was a good point.
Just very shortly, yes. Just again, because this idea of, as quickly and Slovak, and the quote I had there, saying that this idea of beauty being somehow quaint, or beauty being this thing that's in balance or perfect and so on, because imperfections, it's such an imperfect world now, and how we sort of deal with it. I think there are lots of these classical ideas of beauty and of, how we deal with the world as humans and so on, that we need to entirely deconstruct and take it all the way back and then try to look at it from a new perspective. So I do think there are good reasons to be optimistic and to look at the beautiful things, but in that it is very important to take in all the ugly bits as well, and then sort of basically tearing it all down to begin anew, which is of course impossible, but yes. So yes, that would be my answer to that. Yes, we do need to rethink the notion of beauty, and we need to be very critical of it, I think.
Yeah, good point.
I was wondering about trends, because trends, like in the fashion world and everywhere else, kind of trends is very important. And like I was wondering, because you are very like structural critical. Like, where do you see and where is trend, and where does it come from? Yeah, but also in like what part does trend has in this whole aesthetic question?
It's a really good question, and I was also thinking about that with the very interesting proposal of the anti-trend. Coming from a slightly different, because I don't engage in fashion, for example. That's not a part of the work that we do, but we have thought a lot about the notion of trend also within the art world, and I dare say academia as well, that we're always looking for the next thing. And this is something that we've been thinking a lot about also because when we started out 5-6 years ago, there was not the same conversation as we're having today, and oftentimes we felt very much in the avant-garde of the art world, which we're not anymore at all. This conversation and this practice has been brewing, and it's become so strong and so interesting within the last couple of years. And so sometimes in our weakest moments, we felt that we have been sort of surpassed. And of course, that is a horrible way of thinking about it. I was speaking to one of the artists actually at the Kultivator, the Swedish farmers collective, art farming collective, and he said, when artists meet someone who does the same thing as they do, they hate that person. When activists meet someone who does the same things as they do, they love that person and say, let's work together. So I thought that was so interesting, how we're enrolled as cultural workers in this idea of trend, and always being at the front, always being first, always having the new idea or the new research proposal or the new theory. And I think that there's something inherently destructive and really, really, really unhealthy on very many levels, also just for our own personal health, because it's very stressful to sort of maintain that speed and that pace. And I think it's really interesting to think about slowing down and staying with the same questions and doing things in a really thorough and slow and sometimes boring kind of way. Which usually there's not a great platform for in the cultural environment, I'd say, in my experience.
Can I? Because so the new trend is this. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years as a student and then as a researcher, and I've been talking about these first and second and third wave eco-criticism. And when I first started doing this, that was in the midst of first wave eco-criticism. That was so untrendy. Went to conferences in California, there's all these like hippies doing their weed up in the mountains and talking about, everyone's called tree huggers and so on. I remember like going back to Denmark, it was like, what do you want to do this hippie stuff? That is so not the case now, right? This is the year of, I mean, because I've been following this and it's been frightening and encouraging also, because this year people are sort of waking up, it seems. We have Thunberg in the US now and so on, but it's really started rolling. And it's interesting to see why this is the trend now. But I definitely think the new trend is green thought and it's climate. It is everywhere. People are talking about, I mean, can we do art, can we do culture at all if we don't talk about climate? Is it, worthwhile? I think we can, I think we should. And I think films like David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which is like 20 years old, is actually doing something similar to that, without doing it directly or even consciously. And if everything's just about that one trend, that's boring. But it is just really amazing to see how this is the new trend, and like everyone apart from that guy over in the US, like having to deal with it, he'll have to deal with it as well, right? So yes, in terms of trends, this is just, to me, just seems to be the new thing, and that's really, really encouraging, even though it's also very close to getting too late. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a question from down here. There will, just 1 second, you'll get a microphone running towards you, so people watching on the live stream can hear you as well. It's coming from behind.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like the whole notion of trend is a temporary notion, yeah, and it's not, we're not at a point in time where temporary notions are sustainable or viable. I mean, we have to like basically be so anti-trendy that we try to eliminate ourselves. I mean, what we're doing, what we're designing, has to be obsolete from the beginning in the way we design and what we design for. Do you have any like notions like that move beyond the notion of trend or trendiness in the?
Can I? Yeah. I've actually been, this is interesting, because I've been engaging a little bit with designers the last couple of years. Again, at the Swedish University, where I've been doing my multi-species storytelling conference experiment. And what they do is that they engage in unmaking, processes of unmaking. And I thought that was so interesting. And it was something that really made me think a lot about how important design can be to this conversation, right? Because as design, of course, it's been all about making things. Well, now we need to think about how to unmake those things. And so, for example, and I didn't have the time to talk about that, but in the project I was collaborating with the designers called the Unmaking Studio, and they were looking into collaboration with plants and how certain kinds of plants were really, really good at extracting pollutants from the soil. And so that they were engaging with their local communities, and in Småland in Sweden, where they're situated, there's been a lot of glass production, and which is like a really strong design heritage to that area, but which has had catastrophical impact on the local environments and the forest ecologies and the water ecologies. And so they have been working, and really tentatively, and of course this is what I mean when I say staying with the trouble. It's not a perfect collaboration. Obviously, you're sort of forcing these plants to, extract really bad material from the soil, but to sort of suggest a collaboration between species and to think about how to unmake some of those really destructive makings that design has been.
Exactly. That will eliminate the necessity for having this eternal return of the new discourse going on, and also like the anxiety of meeting somebody who actually is doing something that you're doing as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it also depends on how we define trends, and we define trends in design and fashion and so on. But also as we think about it as major lines of thought. I mean, what we've been governed by for a long time now has been growth. Right? This idea that we need to constantly evolve, and not by that much, 2 or 3% a year, but that means in 25 years it will have doubled. So we can talk about fossil fuels, we can talk about going on an airplane, using plastic, whatever. That all matters, but what's really important here is that we need to unmake the idea of growth. I mean, we need to go back, and that might be quite an unfashionable thing to say, but overall, it's just, if we keep on growing, even if we go to sort of all other than fossil fuels and so on, it will still, to find a planet, we have a problem there, I think. And to turn that around, because I don't think that trend is there yet. I mean, all the different, Denmark, wherever, it's all about growth all the time. And activists and so on are talking about it, and I think, we'll get there eventually. But yeah, that is the new trend going the opposite way, I'd say. But yeah.
Yeah, over there.
Thank you. If we are talking about trends, I think with a lot of companies become to be trend to be called sustainable, but they actually are not. They just want to be called that they are doing these kind of sustainable things, and especially in the fashion industry, but they are not actually even like trying. They just want to be called like that. How do you think that we can change it? Because it's quite annoying, and we just cannot know what's the difference, because they gonna call their fashion collection sustainable, but it's actually not.
Yeah, you're very eager to answer, so you can.
Because it's something when we talk about sustainability, there's also this idea of sustainable growth, and I think that's you can't do that, and I think when fashion companies, when all sorts of different companies, we're all talking about green thought now, the environment. But a lot of it is just window dressing. And again, if we keep on having the idea of growth, so IKEA, for instance, very, very sort of environmentally sort of aware, Swedish, so of course they are. But the thing is, they still have this projected growth, because they have to, right? This is what companies do. And as long as they do that, they can keep replacing the woods with recyclable wood and so on. But if it's only half of it, it will still be the same in 25 years' time, because they will need more and more wood. Same thing I just heard this morning with concrete in Aalborg. They think the same thing. They have all these new environmental things that's supposed to be more sustainable, but they also have grown several 100%. That negates all the other stuff. Same thing with the fashion industry. So it also, in my mind, goes back to the idea of growth. And yeah, if you don't eliminate that or turn it around, it doesn't matter.
Thanks for the answer.
Thanks. Do you have anything to add?
No, I completely agree. And I was thinking about, a few weeks back, I was at this beautiful interdisciplinary conference about kelp and seaweed, and there was a lot of designers and artists and philosophers. We're all talking about this really important and exciting material, and it was a sort of perfect gathering. But then at the end, there was an audience member who asked us, how do we make sure that we're not just commodifying seaweed now? That what we're doing now is actually, we're just turning this material into the new perfect product. And I thought that was so important. And as Rune was saying, we need to address systemic change. And I think that is also what you're saying. It's not always a sort of nice message. It's like a sort of disturbing, a little bit annoying. And I think that actually also goes back to the question of beauty, right? Because I think the question is also, how can we, especially particularly in this part of the world, which arguably holds a great deal of responsibility for this mess that we're in, how can we not sit too comfortably with the idea of green consumption, for example, or green living, green design? Because I don't think that we're supposed to feel too comfortable in this aesthetics or this beauty, because we need to really radically and really quickly turn this thing around. And I think exactly, challenging the idea of growth, of trend, seems to me one of the very fundamental things that we need to deal with right away.
Yeah, and now Kristine has also joined us in the panel up here, so you can also ask her questions, and we will try to communicate the questions to her and get the answers to you. And I think there's a question over here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about aesthetics of newness and aesthetics of reuse, and I think it's quite common around young people to look for alternative ways to bring new objects to their houses, which is through this circular, I don't know, even bring stuff from trash. But I think among our older people or the generation of our parents, newness and getting things right away from the store and just not thinking that broad in, maybe the aesthetic of newness is such a strong thing for them to look away from it and look the other way. And I'm kind of curious how do you think there's a chance to approach this group of users? Because with young people, it's quite easy to, I think, I don't know, we were living in this trend in a sense, and it's our mindset already. But I think the older generations, they're going to still be here around very long, in a sense, because the lifespan of a usual person is around 80 right now. And how to approach those older generations with the ideas we're coming up with right now.
So I think the question is basically about the aesthetic of newness and all things and how to change the generations. I don't know. It's a big question.
Well, it depends on how we define the older generations and who they are. But I mean, as you said, it is changing, and I think the younger generations, different, depending on how we define that. But all this is changing quite rapidly for that. And how do we translate these ideas into older generation? I think this is the same thing with flying in airplanes and so on. This is the problem that we have these youth climate activists and older people being so livid, primarily older men, right? Being so livid about it, and that is obviously a sort of resistant to that change, to that new trend. I don't know how we do it, but I think it will happen. I mean, eventually it will just have to happen, because otherwise it's all going to collapse. But and I think it's coming from the younger generation, and hopefully people will be able to sort of to push the older generations. But the same thing we're seeing in Brexit right now. There's sort of the entire country is split into two because of the younger generation having one worldview and the older generation sticking to another one. And we're seeing that all over, and it's a major problem. I don't have the solution for it, but all power to the youth. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was thinking, because now we've been talking a lot about newness and trend, and I just would like to add to that conversation that, of course, this is a new conversational topic, maybe for us or within this say, cultural region. But I think it's important to also maintain that a lot of the things and a lot of the ideas and a lot of the ideas that we're looking towards now in terms of sustainable or regenerative living, I think that we actually need to switch the word sustainable with regeneration. That's a bigger conversation, but I think that that would change the conversation in an interesting way. But my point is that I don't think we necessarily have to adhere to this idea of now we have to come up with a new story, the new thing, because there already exists, obviously, of course, in this world, many other ways of relating to nature, relating to our surroundings in much less destructive ways. It's maybe not just here, but it's certainly here within this particular cultural context and economical context. And I think that we need to stay wary of this when we talk about it, that we don't necessarily have to come up with a new, techno fix, but that we may also just exercise our listening abilities a little bit better and actually look towards other ways of doing life, because they already exist and have for centuries.
Yeah. So my question goes to Rune, but I think it can also be seen in the light of storytelling. And the question is if you can elaborate a bit on these post-apocalyptic fantasy worlds and how they move us forward towards a more sustainable lifestyle. And if this is to break with the longing for the past of more simpler times.
Yeah, well, it can do two things. It can be sort of reactionary. It can be, again, it's very often, these post-apocalyptic visions are often of the world breaking down, and then patriarchy sort of reasserts itself. There's one guy, usually a white guy. It has changed over the past 10, 15 years, but then that's problematic. That's not great. It's just a nostalgic longing for a past that was like 150, 200 years ago. Let's go back to the old ways. But obviously also it can sometimes work as a warning and as a thought experiment. What would happen if we keep going down this route? I think that can be helpful. I think that's just something that Cormac McCarthy's wrote, for instance, is quite good at, and making us realize just how awful a world it would be. But then the third problem, of course, is that it can be too depressing. Just too many of these damaged worlds. At the end of it, you just get fed up with it. I teach environmental writing. I teach post-apocalyptic fiction and so on. But I've noticed that as the trend of global warming, climate and so on is getting hotter and hotter, actually I have fewer students signing up for these courses, I think because it's simply too depressing. The post-apocalyptic stuff they still go for, though. So maybe it's a way of talking about it in a slightly different way, so you're not actually talking about the facts and numbers, you're talking about an imaginary situation, which can be more entertaining. And that then would be the fourth thing, because of course Hollywood fictions and so on are primarily to make money. It's commodity, it's to get people in there to eat popcorn and so on. It's not so much to think about the world. But we can see those trends in Hollywood films. And a film like The Day After Tomorrow, which is, roughly 15 years ago, the science in it is ludicrous. It's also a pretty bad movie. But after this, there was an uptake of Americans actually being interested in global warming, far more than any sort of reports, news reports, books and so on. So it can actually be helpful like that. But that's not to say it's not problematic. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we have time, because time is running out, for one last question, if somebody's very eager to ask. I think there's one over here. Yeah, you can use this one.
Hi. I come from a completely different background, so today I learned the difference between beauty and aesthetics. So I think I already bring something home with me today. So my point is, when it comes to beauty can be the beauty for the grotesque or the beauty of something which is beautiful. And the aesthetics is about the sensations. So my point is, when it comes to trends and connecting to design, we live in a world where we have trends coming every day, whether in fast fashion or when it comes to products and whatever. My point is, if we want to have a sustainable future, how can we balance these trends and making aesthetic goods is something that I look and I say, oh, I need to have it because it's so beautiful, like the last iPhone or the last sweater for some designer or something like that. So how can we balance that sense of I want to have it with reducing our footprint when it comes to these trends?
Yeah, Kristine, did you get the question? But I also think the connection is, maybe you can answer
well,
and then we
maybe
can try
I don't
to...
know, but I mean, I think what Kristine was saying, very nice the fact, I mean, we need to go at this obsolescence, and not just planned obsolescence, but perceived obsolescence. I hate this idea of like, people can get these mobile phones, like you get a new phone every every year. That's just the most annoying, destructive kind of, why would you need to, that we need to entirely go away from that. I mean, I also have an iPhone, I'm part of that whole capitalist and so on, right? It's quite crappy and old, but my plan is to run it into the ground. I wish I could get a fair phone, which is like this, better produced, but problem is just they're just not that good. I mean, and so that it's not beautiful enough, it's not useful enough to me, so therefore I have this phone that is destructive and so on. So obviously there are different things that need to be considered here, and it's not an easy, it's just not just, you can't just do one thing and just like the Fairphone, because the problem, it doesn't sell well, because it's not a good enough object, it's not, design is not good enough. So yeah, again, I have no one answer, but I think what we heard in that third presentation was part of it, certainly.
Can I just, and I also see kind of a trend going, I know it's a smaller one, but like I have an old Nokia, because my iPhone broke, but there is a trend going that way too. So I just found that interesting that trends also do that opposite thing.
It's the whole social media thing of trying to go get out of that, part of that,
so
and consuming that as well.
There's kind of that also.
Okay, I don't think we can get Kristine to answer. I think there's something with the connection. It looks like it's freezing a little bit. So, but I just want to thank you a lot for participating, for you, all of you for asking questions. I think at least for me, also coming from outside, I learned a lot about what beauty can be and how hopefully we can create more sustainable beauty.